Have you ever witnessed a moment so electric, so delicately poised between civility and conflict, that time itself seemed to hesitate? That's where we begin. Not with the debate itself, but with the breath before it, the silence that knew a storm was coming. What happens when two leaders step into a spotlight, not just to argue policy, but to define the very soul of how we move forward? The CNN studio wasn't just a backdrop. It was an altar. Polished, poised, and humming with unspoken promise. The sterile lights were relentless, reflecting off the cool, modern set and casting harsh shadows that seemed to whisper, "This matters." Every surface gleamed, but beneath that gloss, tension coiled like a waiting spring. Anderson Cooper stood at the center of it all. Sharp, silver-haired, still. A man who had walked through hurricanes, war zones, and chaos, but tonight he stood before a different kind of storm. The quiet pressure of live television, the buzz of a nation watching, and the unshakable knowledge that one misstep could fracture something delicate and irreplaceable. The audience was more than a crowd. It was a mosaic. Rows of journalists with sharpened pencils and keener instincts. College students clutching notebooks and nervously glancing toward the stage. Blue-collar workers in button-downs, looking equal parts skeptical and hopeful. And then those silent few. Older, seasoned citizens who had lived through wars and protests, waiting to see if anyone still knew how to speak with both fire and grace. You could almost hear their thoughts. Make it real. Make it count. The control room just beyond the main stage glowed with rows of blinking monitors, each one capturing different angles of the stage. Producers whispered into headsets, giving last-second cues. A stage assistant held a clipboard that trembled slightly in her hands. She was new, and she could feel that this was not just another live broadcast. This was something else, a national reckoning. In the hallway just behind the stage curtain, Ilhan Omar stood in a moment of solitude. Her hand brushed over a necklace with her daughter's name engraved on it. She often did that before stepping into high-stakes rooms. Tonight, the stakes felt impossibly high. She wasn't just here as a politician. She was here as a symbol of resilience, of change, of what some feared and others fought for. She had thought of her childhood earlier that day, the refugee camps, the sound of wind rattling against tent walls, the night sky in Kenya where stars looked like prayers. How far she had come, not just across oceans, but across chasms of identity, language, and belonging. Every step had been uphill, and now, standing backstage, she could feel the weight of those stories pressing against her spine. She stood taller. Across the hall, Senator John Kennedy sat alone in a small room lit by a desk lamp. No phone, no staffers, just a yellow legal pad and a black pen. His notes were minimal, a few phrases, some underlined statistics, and a quote from Lincoln. He believed in showing up prepared, but not over-scripted. He'd learned long ago that people could tell the difference between sincerity and performance. He thought of his father, a World War II vet who worked oil rigs and taught him that good work was its own reward. He thought of the farmers in Ruston and the refinery worker he met last week who broke down in tears over health insurance. This wasn't just another evening for John Kennedy. It was a chance to speak on behalf of a vanishing way of life. The green room doors opened. A staff member motioned toward the stage. It's time. Ilhan and John stepped onto the stage, almost in sync. They did not shake hands. Not yet. The air between them vibrated with ideology. The applause rose as Anderson Cooper walked to his podium center stage. He gave a nod that said, "Let's begin." "Good evening, America," Cooper began, his voice calm but taut with focus. "Tonight, we engage in what is perhaps one of the most consequential debates of our time. How do we power our country, our homes, our industries, our futures, without abandoning the people who have long kept its lights on?" He paused for breath. "Please welcome our guests, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, representing Minnesota, and Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana." The applause shifted. Split. Applause for change. Applause for tradition. Omar's eyes scanned the room. She didn't need to look at her notes. Her truth was etched into her bones. "Congresswoman Omar, you've been a vocal leader for rapid renewable energy expansion. Critics argue it could destabilize working communities. How do you respond?" Ilhan's voice was calm but edged with fire. "Anderson, thank you. This is not about ideology. This is about survival. I speak for children in asthma wards, for neighborhoods where rivers run black. For families like mine who had no power, not because the grid failed, but because it was never built to include them. She stepped into her rhythm, arms lifting, voice rising. When we invest in solar, wind, and geothermal, we're not just cutting emissions, we're creating jobs with dignity, with future. We can train workers from coal mines to climb wind turbines. We can give farmers solar panels and a second income. We're not leaving people behind, we're inviting them forward. Applause. Loudest from younger audience members. A chant almost starts, but is quickly subdued. Cooper turns. Senator Kennedy, your response. Kennedy inhales through his nose and removes his glasses briefly. Well, Anderson, I'll start by saying I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion. Lord knows we need passion in politics. But let me tell you about Darnell. Lives 2 hours outside Baton Rouge, works 12-hour shifts in a petrochemical plant, puts food on his table and his daughter through college. He leans slightly forward. Tell me what Darnell does when his job is replaced by a promise. Tell me how he survives the 6-month gap between layoffs and retraining. If we leap before we look, we don't land on progress. We land on people. Silence. He continues. We need renewables, sure, but we also need to respect the backbone of this country, the people who didn't just power homes, but helped build the homes themselves. This isn't about slowing down progress. It's about steering it with both hands on the wheel. There is applause, a different kind. Sturdy. Rooted. Omar interjects gently. Senator, with all due respect, it's not the pace of change that kills communities. It's the refusal to change at all. We can either retrofit or we can regret. Kennedy nods, unfazed. I don't disagree, Congresswoman. I just want to make sure our transitions don't become trapdoors. For the next 20 minutes, the two don't just debate, they spar through story. Omar references a solar startup in Detroit run by ex-auto workers. Kennedy counters with a Louisiana port project balancing oil and wind development. Each answer weaves in people, place, and a philosophy. Anderson Cooper occasionally nods, sometimes surprised. He is less a referee and more a historian, recording a rare moment where disagreement is not war but witness. By the end of the hour, the applause has shifted. It no longer splits down party lines. People are clapping for different reasons, but they are clapping together. And then, as the lights dim, something unexpected happens. Omar steps toward Kennedy. She offers a hand. We fight hard, Senator, but maybe the best fights are the ones we fight side by side. Kennedy smiles. You got grit, Congresswoman, and grit matters. They shake hands. The nation, stunned by the civility, begins to breathe again. Coming next, the debate continues, but a single sentence will stop the room cold. Sit down, boy, and everything changes. Anderson Cooper adjusted his stance behind the podium. His eyes scanned the audience, an auditorium still quiet but pulsing. People leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath. Online, hashtags surged, clips from the previous hour played on repeat. Omar's impassioned plea, Kennedy's disarming calm, the handshake, the smiles, the fire, and then the stillness. But beneath the applause and headlines was something deeper. This wasn't just policy, it was personal, for them, for us, and now the second round. Let's talk transition, Cooper said, his voice sharper now. What does the road from oil and gas to renewables actually look like, state by state, job by job? Ilhan Omar didn't wait. She leaned in, her palms pressed to the edge of her podium. Her tone had changed, softer, yes, but somehow more commanding. It looks like this. A coal town in West Virginia, once abandoned, now training wind techs in a refurbished school. A rooftop solar company in New Mexico, led by a woman who used to clean buildings under those same roofs. She paused, just briefly, not for effect, for memory. It looks like hope, in practical form. The screen behind her flickered to life. Clips of real workers flashed, a Latino man installing a solar panel, a black mother welding a wind turbine bracket, a tribal elder discussing community-owned geothermal in Alaska. Voices, faces, motion. America in transformation. This isn't theory, it's happening. But it needs investment, intentionality, and yes, leadership that isn't afraid of change. Applause again, but it was laced with something heavier. Challenge. Cooper nodded and turned. Senator Kennedy? Kennedy had remained still during her answer, his face unreadable. Now he exhaled and leaned ever so slightly forward. Congresswoman paints a good picture, and I don't doubt her sincerity for a second. But let me ask you something, Anderson. Cooper blinked. Go ahead. Kennedy looked straight at Omar. How do we promise transformation when we still haven't delivered stability? A murmur. It was a question not just for her, but for all who'd ever promised something better. There are over 190,000 Louisianans who depend directly on oil and gas. That doesn't include the diners feeding those workers, the teachers educating their kids, or the janitors cleaning their offices. It's a whole ecosystem. You can't just replace it with buzzwords and blueprints. He tapped the table lightly. You want to talk about renewable success stories? Great. Let's also talk about the failures. Plants that promised retraining but delivered pink slips. Wind projects that stalled due to transmission bottlenecks. Community solar projects with unclear ownership models that left folks in the dust. Omar raised an eyebrow. I want us to succeed, but success starts with honesty. And right now, we're skipping steps. We're selling the dream without building the bridge. This time, the applause was slower, measured, but it lasted longer. Not because people agreed, because they understood. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled to update the lower thirds, news tickers, and highlight reels. Analysts were already dissecting Kennedy's line, selling the dream without building the bridge. On Twitter, threads exploded. One user wrote, Omar speaks like she's writing the future. Kennedy sounds like he remembers the past. Both matter. Cooper leaned forward. Congresswoman Omar, what would you say to the janitor, the diner owner, the oil rig worker who fears they're not part of your vision? Ilhan nodded, eyes narrowing with something between focus and feeling. I'd say, I see you. A pause. And more than that, I need you. Because this isn't a clean energy revolution without the people who've kept this country running for generations. I want to offer not a handout, but a handoff. Not a pink slip, but a purpose. She breathed, steady but intense. That diner in Houma, Louisiana? We need it open. But next time, let it be serving construction workers building offshore wind arrays. Let the janitor be cleaning offices of new solar startups. Let the oil worker become a leader in geothermal, where their experience matters most. The audience shifted, some leaning back, some forward. Kennedy surprisingly nodded. That sounds good. Another pause, but how? This was the heart of episode 2. Vision met logistics, rhetoric met real life, emotion met execution. And neither side flinched. Over the next half hour, they traded facts and futures. Kennedy quoted the Energy Information Administration, noting that fossil fuels still power 60% of U.S. energy. Omar countered with a case study of Denmark, where wind power exceeds 50%, and profits are shared in community cooperatives. Kennedy raised the issue of mineral dependencies. Are we trading oil rigs for lithium mines in unstable countries? Omar fired back with new legislation she co-authored to boost domestic manufacturing of solar panels and battery storage. Each statistic was grounded in someone's life. Every argument tethered to a name. And then it happened. Omar, mid-response, paused. Senator, with all due respect, your view is becoming the speed bump to a future we can't afford to delay. She looked directly at him. We can't keep waiting for everyone to feel comfortable before doing the right thing. Her voice rose. At some point, the older generation has to let go of the wheel and trust us not to crash. The room gasped. Kennedy looked up. Then she said it. Sit down, boy. It landed like a thunderclap. Shock, murmurs, camera flashes. Not because of the insult, because of who said it and how. Kennedy didn't blink. The moment cracked the air like lightning. She had said it. 3 words that split the silence and sent a shudder through the room. Sit down, boy. Time didn't just slow, it fractured. You could almost hear the collective inhale of the audience, of the crew, of the millions watching at home. The lights, still bright overhead, suddenly felt harsher. The shadows, deeper. No one moved. The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp, lingering. And John Kennedy, the man at the center of the storm, didn't flinch. Not even a blink. His stillness said more than any rebuttal ever could. Anderson Cooper, ever the professional, found himself caught between impulse and protocol. There was a beat, just long enough to feel eternal. Then, with a breath that steadied the room, he returned to his script, though his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. Senator Kennedy, would you like to respond? The senator leaned forward slightly. He adjusted his glasses with care, not haste. And when he spoke, his voice didn't rise, it lowered. Well, Anderson, he began, with the gentle cadence of a man who'd seen more than most cared to admit. Words fly fast in the heat of passion. But I think the folks watching tonight, they're not here for fireworks. They're here for food on the table, lights that stay on, and a path forward they can actually walk. A ripple of relieved laughter passed through the audience, not mocking, but grateful. Kennedy hadn't taken the bait, he'd transformed it. The atmosphere began to settle, though a hum of tension still lingered. Ilhan Omar sat upright, unmoved, her face composed, but the heat in her chest unmistakable. She hadn't planned those words, not exactly, but they came from a place of fire, not malice, frustration, exasperation. She had spoken for a generation, tired of waiting for permission. But now, the world was watching how she would answer back. "Let me be clear," she said, voice steady. "I meant no disrespect, but sometimes decorum becomes a shield for delay, and delay has consequences." She turned to the audience. "We delay in transitioning our economy and sea levels rise. We delay in funding clean infrastructure and asthma rates double. We delay in acting boldly, and it's not policies that suffer, it's people." There was applause again, passionate and purposeful. Cooper interjected. "Senator Kennedy, do you think there is any merit to the urgency Congresswoman Omar is expressing?" Kennedy nodded slowly. "There's always merit in urgency when you're looking at a fire, but it matters where you aim the hose and who you drown while doing it." The line landed hard. He continued, "We can move fast, but we must move smart. And when I hear my colleagues say, 'Trust us,' I always ask, where was that trust when mills closed, when training programs failed, when promises were made in Washington and forgotten by the time the cameras stopped rolling?" He paused. Change isn't just about speed, it's about sequence. The debate had entered new territory, no longer just a battle of ideas. It was now a clash of lived experience. Kennedy's anecdotes became parables. The welder in Plaquemines Parish, the teacher in Monroe, forced to take a second job when her husband's pipeline roll was cut. Omar responded with raw data backed by soul, citing how green energy investments had created over 300,000 new jobs in just 3 years, many in low-income urban and rural communities. She named programs in Detroit, Cleveland, and Des Moines where solar technician training had brought unemployed veterans back into the workforce. Their exchange danced between hope and skepticism, urgency and restraint. And all the while, the tension of that earlier phrase simmered beneath the surface. In homes across America, the divide was palpable. In Minneapolis, a Somali-American family watched Omar with pride, their daughter whispering, "She speaks for us." In Baton Rouge, a retired refinery worker turned off the sound and just watched Kennedy's face. "That man understands," he said softly to no one. In a college dorm in Chicago, students live-tweeted every word. Omar snapped. Kennedy cooled. "This is political theater at its best. Respectability politics versus righteous rage." Did she really say that? I kind of love it. Damn, Kennedy played it like a chess master. But beyond the noise, beyond the tweets and memes, was the quiet truth of the moment. People were listening. Really listening. Then came the moment that flipped the narrative again. Kennedy, in his slow southern drawl, began talking about a woman named Sarah. She's a single mom, works in a refinery down in Shreveport, handles machinery that would intimidate most folks, gets home after 10 hours, helps her kids with algebra, then preps their lunches before bed, doesn't complain, doesn't ask for much, just wants to keep that job so she can keep that roof. The studio was quiet. "Now, I ask you," he continued, "if we pass sweeping legislation tomorrow that says her job is obsolete, where does she go? What does she do? And who's there to catch her?" He looked at Omar, not with defiance, but with sincerity, because she doesn't live in hypotheticals. She lives in reality. Omar responded not with defensiveness, but with depth. "Senator, Sarah matters. And people like her are precisely why I fight the way I do, because I don't want to take away her job. I want to transform it. I want Sarah leading teams that install clean hydrogen systems. I want her to be the supervisor at a battery plant." She looked out at the audience. "This isn't about wiping out livelihoods. It's about rewriting futures." The studio erupted in applause. Cooper took a step back, allowing the moment to breathe. As the conversation continued, a new rhythm emerged. Kennedy would pose a challenge. Omar would answer with innovation. Omar would make a bold claim. Kennedy would temper it with caution. They weren't arguing anymore. They were building something together, though from opposite ends. It wasn't unity. Not quite. But it was something better. It was earned respect. And then, with 5 minutes left, Cooper posed his final question of the night. If you had one sentence to say to the American people tonight, what would it be? Omar went first. This is our chance to build a world where survival and success are not opposites. Kennedy followed. Progress without people is just poetry. Silence. Then applause. This time, united. No sections, no sides, just people, moved. As the cameras panned out and the lights softened, the handshake they had skipped at the beginning was now inevitable. Omar extended her hand again. This time, Kennedy took it without hesitation. The audience stood. Outside, night had fallen. But in that studio, something bright remained. Not resolution, but a reason to believe the next conversation might go even further. The studio did not empty quickly. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, the audience remained rooted in place, as if some unseen force still held them there. Some whispered, some simply sat in silence. The world outside was already spiraling into commentary, media alerts, pundit reactions, trending clips. But in that space, in that moment, something quieter lingered. Respect. Not unanimous agreement. Not certainty. Just the kind of mutual regard rarely witnessed in a political forum. But this wasn't the end, because what comes after fire is reflection. The next day, headlines swirled. Omar shocks with sharp remark. Kennedy's calm wins the crowd. Debate reaches rare note of civility. But beneath the noise, the substance had taken root. Across the country, Americans weren't just watching anymore. They were talking. In a library in Colorado Springs, a group of high school students gathered around a laptop. One played back the clip where Kennedy told the story of Sarah from Shreveport. He didn't villainize her situation, said a student quietly. He respected it. In a Detroit barbershop, men debated Omar's insistence on transformation. She speaks like it's now or never, someone said. Maybe it is, replied another. These weren't political sound bites. These were conversations. Human. Messy. Honest. And that was the real victory. 3 days later, both Kennedy and Omar were back in Washington, not in the same room. But the effects of their clash had already begun to shift things beneath the surface. An email circulated through congressional offices. Bipartisan meetings on clean infrastructure funding. Staffers who never spoke before now exchanged policy drafts. A young Senate aide noted aloud, "They opened a door." In her office, Omar sat with two community organizers from New York and Baltimore. They brought data, maps, and urgent requests. The federal solar grant is stuck in committee. If we don't push it now, we lose the workforce we just trained. Ilhan nodded, marking the details. We'll push. And I'll talk to Republicans too. I meant what I said on that stage. It's not about erasure. It's about expansion. Meanwhile, Kennedy walked the refinery floor in Baton Rouge. The plant smelled like oil and metal and sweat, a smell he'd never forgotten. "They all saw you on TV, Senator," a worker called out. "Didn't think a guy like you would shake her hand." "Ain't about agreeing," Kennedy replied. "It's about listening." She made some good points. Another worker chimed in. "You think there's a place for folks like us in this new energy stuff?" Kennedy looked around the warehouse. He saw experience, calloused hands, eyes that understood risk. "You're not just part of it. You build it. We just got to make sure nobody forgets that." That night, a CNN panel tried to recreate the fire from the debate. But even the hosts admitted something had changed. It wasn't just political theater, one said. It was surprisingly human. Another nodded. There was a sense that they could disagree without tearing each other down. That's rare. The next public meeting came unexpectedly. A town hall in Kansas City. Omar had been invited by a local Green coalition. Kennedy, hearing about it, reached out. "Mind if I join?" She hesitated for a moment, then responded simply, "Yes, let's do this." The room was modest. A high school gymnasium, folding chairs, a table up front, no cameras, no CNN stage, just people. And the questions came quickly. How do you fund these transitions without bankrupting small towns? What about people too old to retrain? What happens when the tech fails? Omar fielded the policy details. Kennedy reinforced the need for phased approaches. They challenged each other but never crossed the line. A man in the back stood. "I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a mechanic. My job depends on truckers who depend on gas. I hear both of you, but I just want to know I won't be forgotten." Omar walked toward him. Not symbolically, literally. You won't be. She took a folded paper from her folder. This is a draft proposal for a rural transport subsidy that includes small fleet operators. You matter. Kennedy stepped forward. We'll make sure that subsidy doesn't get buried in bureaucratic nonsense. I'll walk it through myself. The man nodded. Slowly. Not convinced, but seen. And that mattered. By the end of the meeting, a line had formed. Not for autographs. For answers. For eye contact. For hope. People approached with notebooks, resumes, sketches of ideas. Some simply asked for a minute, and both lawmakers gave them more than that. It wasn't about press. It was about presence. In the weeks that followed, more co-sponsored legislation surfaced. Kennedy introduced a funding bill for clean tech apprenticeships. Omar signed on. Omar led a working group on equitable rural energy policy. Kennedy joined. The handshake wasn't a symbol, it was a spark, and the fire that followed, it didn't burn down. It lit a way forward. The wind outside the Capitol was still that evening. No gusts, no flags whipping on the steps, just a calm that wrapped the marble in a hush, like even the sky was listening. Inside, beneath old chandeliers and polished oak, two lawmakers stood in a hallway, most often reserved for quick steps and quiet deals. But they weren't rushing. They weren't negotiating. They were just standing. Ilhan Omar had her hands folded in front of her. John Kennedy adjusted his cufflink. For a moment, neither spoke. Funny, Kennedy said at last, his voice low. We ended up in the same building, saying the same things. Just took very different roads to get here. Omar smiled, just a little. Or maybe we were always in the same building. We just hadn't opened the same doors yet. It had been weeks since the debate. A month, maybe more. But its echoes had not faded. Not in their halls. Not in their inboxes. Not in the lives of the people they served. The bills didn't pass overnight. Nothing in Washington ever did. But movement had begun. The Energy Transition Workforce Act, co-sponsored by Omar and Kennedy, cleared committee. It outlined federal support for retraining programs, targeting areas hardest hit by industrial decline. More than that, it guaranteed direct subsidies to community colleges and unions building clean energy certifications. Not flashy, but real. And real was enough to change lives. In Ohio, a steelworker who had been laid off 3 years ago got an email from a local energy co-op. It offered training, full tuition covered, for a wind tech certification. Didn't think I'd ever be useful again, he muttered, rereading the message. In Arizona, a high school senior from a Navajo reservation read a flyer pinned to her school's corkboard. Geothermal field training, housing included, $22 an hour starting. She tore the flyer down. It felt like it had been posted for her alone. In Louisiana, Sarah, yes, the Sarah Kennedy had described, got a call. Ma'am, we're opening a hydrogen facility 20 miles south of you. We need people who can handle high-pressure operations. Your name came highly recommended. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, I still have my boots. The change wasn't seismic. Not yet. But it was spreading. What had started as a confrontation on a stage had become a conversation across counties, cities, entire sectors. The faces behind the policies were stepping forward. At a town hall in Georgia, a young mother asked Omar how the new funding would reach her neighborhood. We're partnering with your local college, Omar answered. But more than that, we're asking you to shape how it's spent. At a press stop in Texas, Kennedy fielded a question from an oil rig supervisor. You still believe in oil, Senator? Kennedy didn't hesitate. I believe in people who work hard. I believe in transitions that make room for them. He paused, and I believe in listening. What people noticed most wasn't the bills, though. It was how Kennedy and Omar spoke about each other. Gone were the jabs, the defensive posture. They didn't always agree, but they quoted one another, referred to ideas they'd heard, gave credit. As Congresswoman Omar said during our debate, as Senator Kennedy reminded us so clearly, some called it political strategy. Others called it rare. But many called it what it truly was. Growth. On a podcast interview, Omar was asked what moment changed the debate for her. She paused. When he didn't hit back, after I said what I said, he could have mocked me, could have made it about ego, but he didn't. He made it about people. Later that same week, Kennedy did an interview of his own. She didn't back down, he said. I respect that. She didn't walk away from the heat. She walked through it. We don't have enough of that in this place. The final vote on the Workforce Act came on a rainy Thursday. It passed, narrowly, bipartisan, no fanfare, no celebration banners. But in a break room in Duluth, Minnesota, a woman closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And in a pickup truck outside Shreveport, a man muttered, "About damn time." Omar and Kennedy met again the following week. A forum. Smaller, less formal, folding chairs again. A kid, maybe 17, stood up during Q&A. "What do you think it means to lead now?" Omar looked at Kennedy. Kennedy looked at Omar. This time, they spoke together. "It means you don't have to win every point, just the right ones." The kid nodded. "And it means you don't talk to prove you're right," Omar added. "You talk," Kennedy finished, "to prove you're still listening." The room went still, but it wasn't silence. It was something stronger. Belief. That this could happen again, that these moments could grow, and that in a world so often split in two, progress might just begin with a conversation. Not to destroy, but to build together.